In a small, quiet town in Mississippi, life moved at its own pace. People knew each other by name, and the streets were lined with old trees that had stood there for decades. It was one of those places where everyone seemed connected, but also where rumors spread faster than wildfire. In this town lived a 16-year-old girl who defied the odds every single day. Her name wasn't important to most people. What mattered was how different she was. This young girl was blind. She couldn't see the world around her, but she felt it deeply. Every sound, every texture, every breath told her something about the place she called home. She navigated her days with confidence, using her cane to explore the uneven sidewalks and listening carefully to the chatter of neighbors as they passed by. Despite her blindness, she had dreams bigger than anyone could imagine. School was her sanctuary, and books written in Braille became her closest friends. She loved learning, not because it was easy, but because it gave her hope for a future where her disability wouldn't define her. Her grandmother raised her after both her parents disappeared from her life years ago. They didn't leave a note or say goodbye, they just vanished. The girl never held it against them, though. Instead, she focused on surviving, thriving even, despite all the challenges life threw her way. Her grandmother worked long hours cleaning houses to make ends meet, and together they scraped by. Their little house wasn't much. It had creaky floors and peeling paint, but it was filled with love. That's what kept them going. One evening, everything changed. The sun had set, and the air was thick with humidity. Crickets chirped outside, and the distant hum of cars passing on the highway broke the silence. Inside their modest home, the girl sat at the kitchen table, running her fingers over a Braille textbook. She was studying hard for an upcoming exam, determined to prove to herself and to the world that she could succeed no matter what. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door. Startled, the girl paused, her heart racing. Who could be visiting at this hour? Her grandmother was already asleep in the next room, exhausted from another grueling day of work. The knocking grew louder, more urgent. Slowly, the girl stood up and made her way to the door, gripping her cane tightly. When she opened it, 2 police officers stood on the porch. Their flashlights illuminated the dark space, casting eerie shadows across the walls. One of them spoke first, his voice stern and authoritative. "We're here to speak with you," he said. "You're under arrest." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Arrested? For what? Confusion clouded her mind as she tried to process what was happening. Before she could ask any questions, the officers began reciting her rights. Handcuffs clicked around her wrists, cold and unyielding. Panic bubbled inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed answers. As they led her outside, she heard whispers from neighbors gathering nearby. Some sounded curious, others judgmental. "What did she do?" someone murmured. Another voice replied, "I heard it was bad. Something about vandalism." The girl wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, but she knew it wouldn't help. Nothing she said would change their minds, not now, anyway. At the station, the truth came out, or at least part of it. The police accused her of vandalizing a local convenience store. Someone had spray-painted hateful messages on the walls, including anti-police slogans. Witnesses claimed to have seen a young black girl running away from the scene. That description was enough for the authorities to point fingers at her. Never mind that she was blind and had been home alone studying when the crime occurred. The days following the arrest felt like a blur to the blind girl. She spent most of her time locked in a cold, sterile cell at the juvenile detention center, waiting for answers that never came. Her grandmother visited as often as she could, bringing warmth and reassurance with every hug. But even her grandmother's love couldn't shield her from the harsh reality of what was happening. The town had already made up its mind about her guilt. Long before any trial began, news of the case spread quickly. People talked about it at grocery stores, coffee shops, and bus stops. Some believed she was guilty simply because of who she was, a black teenager living in poverty, blind or not. Others thought it didn't matter whether she could see. They argued that someone must have helped her commit the crime. Few bothered to question if she was truly capable of doing such a thing. In their eyes, she fit the profile of a troublemaker. And that was enough. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was packed with spectators eager to witness the proceedings. Reporters scribbled notes furiously while cameras clicked away, capturing every moment. For the blind girl, the atmosphere was overwhelming. She couldn't see the crowd, but she could feel their stares, hear their whispers. It was clear that many had already decided her fate. Her lawyer, a kind woman in her late 30s, stood beside her. The lawyer had taken on the case pro bono, believing firmly in her client's innocence. She worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and preparing arguments to defend the girl. Still, the odds were stacked against them. The prosecution painted a damning picture, relying heavily on witness testimonies and circumstantial evidence. They claimed that being blind didn't mean she couldn't be involved, that perhaps someone guided her hand or gave her tools to carry out the act. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution called several witnesses to the stand. One by one, they recounted seeing a young black girl near the convenience store around the time of the vandalism. Their descriptions were vague, but they all agreed on one thing: the person they saw matched the defendant's appearance. When cross-examined, however, inconsistencies emerged. Some said the girl wore a hoodie, others swore she didn't. A few mentioned hearing laughter, but none could recall specific details about her actions. The defense countered these accounts by presenting alibis. Teachers testified that the girl had been focused on her studies during the week leading up to the incident. Neighbors confirmed that she rarely left the house after dark, especially alone. Even the convenience store owner admitted under oath that he wasn't entirely sure the accused was responsible. He'd only reported what he heard from others, hoping the police would find whoever damaged his property. Despite these efforts, doubt lingered in the air. The jury seemed unconvinced, and the judge's stern expression suggested he leaned toward believing the prosecution's narrative. For the blind girl, sitting quietly through hours of testimony was exhausting. She listened intently, piecing together fragments of information from voices and tones. Each word weighed heavily on her shoulders, yet she refused to let despair take over. When it came time for closing arguments, the tension in the room reached a breaking point. The prosecutor delivered a fiery speech, emphasizing the seriousness of the alleged crime. He reminded the jury that justice demanded accountability, regardless of the defendant's circumstances. His words struck fear into the hearts of those listening, painting the girl as a symbol of chaos rather than an individual deserving fairness. Then it was the defense attorney's turn. With passion and conviction, she urged the jury to look beyond assumptions and focus on facts. She highlighted the lack of concrete evidence tying her client to the scene of the crime. "This isn't just about one girl," she said, her voice steady but powerful. "It's about ensuring our system treats everyone equally, no matter their race, background, or abilities." Her plea resonated with some, but not all. As the jury retreated to deliberate, the courtroom fell silent. The blind girl sat still, gripping the edge of the table. She tried to block out the noise in her head, the doubts, the fears, the weight of uncertainty. Minutes turned into hours, and finally the jury returned with a verdict: guilty. The word echoed through the room like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and the girl's heart sank. She hadn't expected this outcome, though deep down she knew it was possible. Through tears she refused to shed, she braced herself for the judge's final decision. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at the papers in front of him, and opened his mouth to speak. But before he could utter a single word, the girl raised her voice. Clear and unwavering, she interrupted the silence. "Your Honor," she said, her tone commanding. Attention despite her small frame. "Don't read the sentence yet." Every eye in the room turned toward her. The judge paused, surprised by her boldness. Lawyers exchanged glances, unsure of what to expect next. Even the reporter stopped typing mid-sentence, captivated by the unexpected turn of events. With permission granted hesitantly, the girl began speaking. Her words weren't rehearsed, but they carried a weight that silenced the entire courtroom. "I know what people think of me," she started, her voice calm but firm. "They see my skin color, my blindness, and assume I'm either helpless or dangerous, but I'm neither. I'm here because I believe in justice, not just for myself, but for everyone." She went on to explain how systemic issues, poverty, lack of resources, and prejudice had shaped her life and others' perceptions of her. Then she made a startling request. "There's something you need to see," she told the judge. "Something at the scene of the crime that doesn't add up. Please go there yourself. Look closely." Her statement sent shockwaves through the room. Was this a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable? Or did she truly know something no one else did? Whatever the reason, her confidence left an impression no one could ignore. The judge, intrigued and perhaps slightly unnerved, agreed to visit the vandalized store the following day. Little did anyone know, this simple act would unravel the truth and change everything. The courtroom fell silent after the girl's bold interruption. Everyone seemed frozen in place, unsure of what to do next. The judge, usually stern and unshakable, looked momentarily taken aback. He wasn't used to being addressed so directly, especially by someone as young as the defendant. After a brief pause, he leaned forward, his expression softening just slightly. "What is it you want to say?" he asked, his voice quieter than before but still firm. The girl took a deep breath. She knew this was her only chance to make people listen, to show them that she wasn't just a label or a stereotype. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I know what people think of me," she began, speaking slowly so every word landed with weight. "They see my skin color, my blindness, and they assume things about me. Some think I'm helpless because I can't see. Others think I must be dangerous because of where I come from. But neither of those things is true." Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. The crowd shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For many, her statement hit close to home. They had judged her without even realizing it, letting preconceived notions cloud their judgment. Even the jury members exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the truth in what she was saying. "But I'm here today, not just for myself," she continued. "I'm here because I believe in justice for everyone. And right now, justice isn't being served. Not for me, and not for anyone else who might get caught up in a system that doesn't look closely enough." She paused, letting her words sink in. Then, with quiet determination, she added, "There's something at the scene of the crime that doesn't add up. Something important. I'm asking you, Your Honor, to go there yourself. Look closely. If you do, you'll see why I couldn't have done what they're accusing me of." The room erupted into murmurs. People whispered to each other, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Was she bluffing? Did she really know something no one else did? Or was this just a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable? The judge raised a hand to silence the growing chatter. He studied the girl carefully, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he nodded. "Very well," he said. "I'll visit the site tomorrow morning." "But if this turns out to be a waste of time—" "It won't be," the girl interrupted, her voice calm but resolute. "I promise." The next day, Judge Grayson arrived at the vandalized convenience store along with a small team of investigators. The shop sat on a quiet corner of the town, its once clean walls now marred by angry red spray paint. Messages like "No justice, no peace, and cops lie" covered the exterior, stark against the faded brick. It was an ugly sight, one that had stirred anger and fear among the townspeople when it first appeared. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. The graffiti was fresh, the edges still sharp. But as the judge stepped closer, one of the officers noticed something odd. Near the bottom of the wall, faint smudges of fingerprints were visible. They weren't obvious, just barely noticeable, but they were there. Fingerprints? The judge muttered under his breath. How could there be fingerprints if the accused is blind? It was a valid question. The prosecution had argued that perhaps someone had guided her hand or provided tools for her to commit the act. But how could a blind person leave behind such marks? Blind individuals rely on touch to navigate the world, yet their movements are deliberate and careful, not careless enough to leave prints behind. Curious, the investigators dusted the area for clearer evidence. Sure enough, the prints belonged to someone with full use of their vision. This discovery sent shockwaves through the team. If these prints didn't match the girls, then who did they belong to? Further examination revealed another clue. Hidden beneath layers of paint, tiny flecks of fabric clung to the wall. Someone wearing a hoodie had brushed against the wet graffiti, leaving behind fibers that would later be analyzed. These findings contradicted the prosecution's claims entirely. Meanwhile, back at the station, detectives reviewed security footage from a nearby gas station. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but it captured enough to identify two figures lurking near the convenience store around the time of the vandalism. Both wore hoodies and moved quickly, clearly trying to avoid detection. Neither figure matched. The description of the accused girl Dot, as more evidence came to light, cracks began to form in the case against her. Witnesses' testimonies, once considered solid, now seemed shaky and inconsistent. One claimed to have seen a young black girl running away, but when pressed, admitted they hadn't gotten a good look at her face. Another insisted she heard laughter coming from the direction of the store, though she couldn't recall any distinct voices. By the end of the day, the investigation had uncovered undeniable proof. The blind girl couldn't have committed the crime. Someone else was responsible, and thanks to her courage and insight, the truth was finally coming to light. Back in court the following morning, the atmosphere was electric. Word of the new evidence had spread quickly, and the gallery buzzed with anticipation. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, while spectators whispered theories to one another. The prosecution team looked visibly uneasy, flipping through files and conferring in hushed tones. When Judge Grayson entered the room, the tension reached its peak. He wasted no time getting to the point. Addressing the court, he summarized the findings from the previous day's investigation. The fingerprints, the fabric samples, and the security footage all pointed to a different suspect or suspects. There was no longer any doubt. The girl standing before him was innocent. The prosecutor stood to respond, but his argument sounded hollow even to his own ears. Without concrete evidence tying the defendant to the crime, their case crumbled. He tried to salvage what he could, suggesting that perhaps she had been coerced or manipulated by others. But the defense attorney swiftly countered, reminding the court that assumptions weren't enough to convict someone. Throughout the proceedings, the girl remained composed. She listened intently to every word, her expression unreadable. When the judge finally turned to her and asked if she had anything to say, she shook her head. She didn't need to defend herself anymore. The truth had already spoken for her. As the judge prepared to deliver his final ruling, the courtroom held its collective breath. For the first time in days, hope flickered in the air. Justice might actually prevail. The courtroom felt different that morning. There was a buzz in the air, an energy that hadn't been there before. People whispered to each other, their voices low but urgent. Some leaned forward in their seats, while others scribbled notes or adjusted their cameras, ready to capture whatever unfolded next. For days, the trial had dragged on, filled with accusations and doubts. But now, something big was about to happen. Everyone could feel it. Judge Grayson sat at his bench, his face unreadable. He shuffled through papers, glancing up occasionally at the girl standing quietly beside her lawyer. She looked calm, almost serene, despite the weight of everything hanging over her. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, fingers tracing the smooth wood as if memorizing its texture. She couldn't see the crowd watching her, but she could hear them, the rustling of clothes, the creak of chairs, the faint hum of anticipation. And she knew this moment mattered more than anything else in her life so far. Finally, the judge cleared his throat and addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but tinged with gravity, "yesterday's investigation into the crime scene revealed critical evidence that cannot be ignored." He paused, letting his words sink in. The room went silent. Every eye fixed on him, he continued, explaining what had been found. The fingerprints near the graffiti didn't match anyone who was blind. They belonged to someone with full use of their sight. Then there were the fabric fibers, tiny threads clinging to the wall where the paint was still wet. Someone wearing a hoodie had brushed against it, leaving behind traces of clothing. None of this pointed to the defendant. And finally, the judge added, holding up a photo taken from the security footage, We have visual confirmation of two individuals seen near the convenience store at the time of the vandalism. Neither matches the description of the accused. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His earlier confidence seemed to have vanished. When called upon to respond, he struggled to find solid ground. "Your Honor," he started, his voice wavering slightly, "while this new evidence is certainly compelling, we must also consider the possibility that the defendant may have acted under duress or coercion. Perhaps she was directed by others." Before he could finish, the defense attorney rose to her feet. "Your Honor," she said firmly, cutting him off, "there is no credible evidence suggesting my client had any involvement whatsoever. To suggest otherwise without proof is baseless speculation and unjust." Her words rang out clearly, silencing the prosecutor. The jury exchanged glances, visibly uneasy. It was becoming clear to everyone in the room that the case against the girl was falling apart. As the judge reviewed the new findings, another piece of the puzzle emerged. Investigators traced the fingerprints to a local teenager, a boy known for skipping school and getting into trouble. When questioned, he initially denied knowing anything about the vandalism. But when shown the security footage and confronted with the fabric samples, his story crumbled. Eventually, he confessed not just to the graffiti, but also to implicating the blind girl. "I didn't think they'd actually arrest her," he admitted, his voice trembling. "I told the cops I saw a black girl running away because I thought it would throw them off my trail. I didn't mean for it to go this far." His confession sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and even the judge looked momentarily stunned. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity, it was a glaring example of how bias and assumptions could destroy lives. The boy's careless lie had nearly cost an innocent girl her freedom. When the judge turned back to the girl, his expression softened. For the first time in the trial, he seemed genuinely affected. "Young lady," he said, addressing her directly, "you've shown remarkable courage throughout these proceedings. Not many people would have the strength to speak up the way you did, to demand that we look closer, even when the odds were stacked against you." She nodded slowly, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. "Thank you, Your Honor," she replied softly. Though her voice was quiet, it carried a weight that resonated throughout the room. She didn't need to say more. Her actions had already spoken volumes. With the new evidence overwhelming and irrefutable, the judge made his decision. Turning to the jury, he instructed them to reconsider their verdict. After a brief deliberation, they returned with a unanimous decision: not guilty. Cheers erupted from the gallery, though quickly silenced by the bailiff's stern glare. The girl's grandmother burst into tears, clutching her chest as she tried to process what had just happened. The defense attorney hugged her client tightly, whispering words of relief and pride, but the girl stayed composed. She stood tall, her head held high, as the judge formally dismissed all charges against her. "Justice has been served today," he declared, looking around the room. "This case reminds us all of the importance of fairness, diligence, and truth. Let it serve as a lesson moving forward." As the gavel came down with a sharp crack, signaling the end of the trial, the girl exhaled deeply. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to relax. The weight that had pressed down on her shoulders for so long finally lifted. She reached out toward her grandmother, finding comfort in the familiar warmth of her embrace. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around them, shouting questions and snapping photos. Neighbors who had once doubted her innocence now approached with apologies and kind words. Some even hugged her, tears streaming down their faces. The town that had condemned her was now rallying behind her, inspired by her resilience and determination, but amid the chaos, the girl remained focused. This victory wasn't just for her, it was for everyone who had ever been judged unfairly, for those who had faced prejudice and hardship simply because of who they were. She knew her fight wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. The sun rose over the small Mississippi town, casting golden light across streets that had once been filled with whispers and judgment. For weeks, this place had been consumed by the trial of a blind girl accused of a crime she didn't commit. Now, as news of her exoneration spread, the mood shifted. People began to talk not just about what had happened in court, but about how they'd let assumptions cloud their judgment. Conversations bubbled up at bus stops, grocery stores, and coffee shops. Some felt ashamed for doubting her. Others were inspired by her courage. One thing was clear: the girl's story had changed them. Outside the courthouse, reporters jostled for position, microphones thrust forward like weapons. They shouted questions, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. "How does it feel to be free?" one asked. "What do you want to say to those who doubted you?" Another pressed. Camera flashes lit up the steps like fireworks, capturing every step she took toward freedom, but the girl moved steadily, her cane tapping against the pavement with purpose. She wasn't fazed by the noise or the attention. Her grandmother walked beside her, gripping her arm protectively while wiping away tears. Neighbors gathered nearby, some clapping, others offering hugs. Many apologized, saying things like, "We should have known better," or "You're stronger than all of us." The girl accepted their words graciously, nodding and smiling softly. But inside, she knew forgiveness wasn't hers to give. It belonged to something bigger than herself. As the crowd thinned, she paused at the bottom of the courthouse steps. Turning slightly toward the reporters, she raised a hand to quiet them. Slowly, the noise died down until only the hum of distant traffic remained. "I want to thank everyone who stood by me," she began, her voice calm but firm. "My grandmother, my lawyer, and even Judge Grayson for listening when no one else would. But most importantly, I want to thank myself for believing that truth matters more than fear." Her words hung in the air, simple yet profound. She didn't need to shout or make grand statements. Her presence alone spoke volumes. Here was a girl who had faced injustice head-on, refusing to let prejudice define her. And now, standing under the bright morning sky, she radiated hope. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could get after such an ordeal. The convenience store owner repainted his walls, covering the hateful graffiti with fresh white paint. He admitted in an interview that he regretted rushing to accuse someone without solid evidence. "I learned a lesson," he said. "Assumptions hurt people. We need to be careful before pointing fingers." Meanwhile, the boy who confessed to the vandalism faced consequences for his actions. He was sentenced to community service and required to attend counseling sessions. Though his punishment was lighter than prison time, it weighed heavily on him. In a letter to the blind girl, he wrote, "I'm sorry for ruining your life. I hope someday you can forgive me." She never responded, but her lawyer shared the note during interviews, emphasizing the importance of accountability and growth. For the girl, moving on meant focusing on the future. She returned to school, where teachers and classmates greeted her with newfound respect. Some offered kind words, while others simply gave her space to heal. Every day she navigated the hallways with her usual confidence, using her cane to explore familiar corners. Her love for learning hadn't faded. If anything, it burned brighter than ever. She dreamed of becoming an advocate for marginalized communities, someone who could fight for justice not just for herself, but for others facing similar struggles. One afternoon, sitting in her favorite spot at the library, she listened intently as a volunteer read aloud from a book about civil rights leaders. Stories of resilience and determination resonated deeply with her. She imagined herself walking in their footsteps someday, speaking out against inequality and inspiring change. It was a daunting dream, but she believed it was possible. After all, she had already proven that one person's voice could challenge an entire system. Months later, the girl's story gained national attention. News outlets picked it up, turning her into a symbol of hope and perseverance. Interviews aired on television, and articles appeared in newspapers across the country. People marveled at her bravery, calling her a hero. Yet, despite the praise, she stayed grounded. Fame wasn't what motivated her, it was the desire to create a better world. She started giving speeches at local events, sharing her experience with anyone willing to listen. At first, she was nervous, unsure of how her words would land. But soon, she found her rhythm, weaving humor and wisdom into each talk. Audiences laughed, cried, and applauded, leaving inspired to confront their own biases. Teachers invited her to speak at schools. Hoping her story would teach students the value of empathy and fairness, her message was always the same. Don't judge someone based on what you see or don't see. Look deeper, listen closer. Sometimes the truth isn't obvious, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. Years passed, and the girl grew into a young woman. Her advocacy work expanded beyond her hometown, reaching cities far and wide. She collaborated with organizations fighting for racial equality, disability rights, and criminal justice reform. Her name became synonymous with resilience, reminding people that even in the darkest moments there is light. One evening, as she prepared for a speech at a major conference, she reflected on how far she'd come. From a tiny kitchen table cluttered with Braille textbooks to stages packed with eager listeners, her journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet, through it all, she remained true to herself, determined, compassionate, and unafraid, standing. Behind the podium, she smiled as applause filled the auditorium. When the noise subsided, she leaned forward slightly, her voice carrying effortlessly to the back rows. "Life throws challenges at us," she began, her tone warm and conversational. "Sometimes those challenges seem impossible to overcome. But I've learned that the hardest battles often lead to the greatest victories. What matters isn't how many times you fall, it's how many times you get back up." The audience erupted into cheers, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Tears glistened in her eyes, not from sadness but from gratitude. She had fought hard for this moment, not just for herself, but for everyone counting on her to keep pushing forward.